From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. We're a show about work on our own terms. Trust is like oxygen. When you have it, between people or in community or in a society, you don't even notice it. Things just work. People get along. When things don't go just as you'd expect, we give each other the benefit of the doubt. We assume best intentions. But when trust starts to fade, everything gets harder. Without it, we can't survive, as individuals or as a society. And I think we're feeling this in our culture today. There's a communications firm called Edelman. It puts out an annual report every year, just about now, that looks at the level of trust we have in institutions, like the media, the government, and business. And for the most part, over the past 2.5 decades, the level of trust is declining. We're skeptical, cynical. Now, this is public trust, of course, the degree to which we're confident in the integrity of our society, but it reflects and informs our ability to simply trust each other. This is a problem, like a big problem. We need to trust each other for things to work well around us. We have to. So how do we build and rebuild relationships, the kind that work? You know, I care so much about this question. So much that I went in search of experts, people who could explain exactly what we need to be doing right now. And today's episode, well, you should consider it a primer on how to understand ourselves and our friends and colleagues better, and how we can fix even the most broken relationships, because that is where trust comes from. More right after this. Today, I am thrilled to introduce two experts in the art and science of trust, Anne Morris and Frances Frei. Anne is a co-founder of the Leadership Consortium. It's a management consultancy that helps organizations unlock leadership potential and drive positive change. She's the coach with the most. She's worked with some of the world's best, most well-known organizations to help them build stronger and more resilient cultures. Frances is a beloved professor at Harvard Business School and a leading authority on organizational behavior, leadership, and trust. Frances has spent years studying how people in positions of power can either break or rebuild trust, and she's worked with leaders across industries, from tech giants to global nonprofits. Frances is also Anne's wife. Now, they co-wrote a book together. It's called Unleashed, The Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. And they host an awesome podcast called Fixable. It's a call-in show. To wit, they think everything is fixable. So people call in with their problems, or they just look around and identify problems, and then they tell you how to solve them. So let's talk to them about trust. What is it? You're going to hear from Frances first.
Trust is at its core, it's a belief on whether or not I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? It's the granting of that. And we have found out that it's actually got an enormously robust definition, which is if you believe 3 things about me, you will involuntarily trust me. It's incredible. So if you believe in my authenticity, while also believing in my logic, while also believing in my empathy, you will trust me.
As if it were a math equation.
In a shocking turn of events, Jessi, it can be reduced to a math equation.
What's good about that is that whether it's between 2 people, whether it's between 2 institutions, whether it's between a country and its citizens, it doesn't matter. Now, how these things manifest will vary dramatically, but it always comes down to these 3. And so when we've studied trust, both what creates it, but also when it's broken, what got in the way, we have never found a 4th culprit. And we've done it with hundreds of thousands of individuals and tens of thousands of organizations. Maybe one day we'll find the fourth component part, but there just hasn't been yet. So that's both deeply liberating because you can just go look at these three. And then it's, well, how do they apply in my unique context, which is challenging enough. Yeah. So I think in terms of how does trust work, it's through these three levers.
We call it the trust triangle. These three drivers of trust: logic, authenticity, and empathy. And the one pattern we observe, so the pattern itself, the architecture of trust is very stable, and you can find the pattern in all of the psychology literature. But the other pattern we see is that all of us lose trust some of the time or fail to build as much trust as might be possible in a relationship. So there's this myth about trust that it's like this Fabergé egg, and you lose it and it's impossible to rebuild it. In fact, we see the opposite. We are constantly bumping into each other and losing trust. And it's often an opportunity because by rebuilding it, you can actually get to a stronger relationship on the other side.
Right.
So when we...
Well, I'm just going to stop you here and say, I mean, that is, I think they're about like a healthy marriage, right? Like my marriage is built not in the trust that we established 15 years ago, but in all of the ways that it has broken over the past 15 years and what we learned about how to fix it.
It's fixable.
100%. And all of the literature backs you up on that. It's right. really powerful. So when we work with individuals, this is probably not shocking, but that's the unit of analysis that's most interesting to me, right? When we work with individuals, we will look through the lens of trust and when you do lose trust, what's the pattern? Which of these three tends to get a little wobbly on you? And that's what we use the word wobble when we do this. We can also do that same analysis at the level of team and at the level of organization.
It seems like we perhaps all have a wobble. Is there any opportunity for self-diagnosis here, even as we're going into leadership positions before we've messed up anything?
Yes.
Professor, bring us home on this one.
So here's a very quick one. You can self-diagnose. In fact, you should only self-diagnose. Other diagnosis can really lead you into trouble. So just recall the most recent time you weren't able to earn the trust of someone else. So recall a recent time where you had a skeptic. Doesn't matter in what context. I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. If we had a chance to interview your skeptic or skeptics, what would they say got in the way? Was it that they didn't get the sense that it was the real you? Did they not get the sense that you had sound reasoning and the rigor wasn't there? Or did they not get the sense that you were in it for them? Was it authenticity, logic, or empathy? Whichever one that is, begin with that as your wobble. Mm-hmm. And then we have prescriptions for all of the wobbles. So the reason we use wobble in like a playful way is that it is not fatal. It is not devastating. We can shore up any wobble, but probably one is a little bit more prominent than the others. And so that's the one I would work on first.
Right. Is there a wobble we want? Is there one that's easier to shore up than the others?
Oh, logic is the easiest one to shore up.
Ah, shoot. I was afraid you would say that.
Yeah. So logic is, and then empathy and authenticity is the hardest one.
Why is authenticity the hardest?
Because it requires for you, if you are an authenticity wobble, it will go a long way if you experience my empathy, will set the conditions a little bit better for your authenticity to come out. So your authenticity is boosted by my empathy, whereas your logic is not boosted by my anything. You can shore up your own. So authenticity is the only one that has an interaction effect with the empathy of others. So it's harder.
I'm an authenticity wobbler, so I'll offer the case study here. So the last time I wobbled on authenticity was 2 nights ago when our son asked if I would come. He's now at an age where I don't read him a story, but I could read a story next to him. We could parallel play. He said, will you come do this, as part of the bedtime ritual? And I said, yeah, of course, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Finally came downstairs. He said, it's not going to be 5 minutes. You're going to clean the kitchen and you're going to let the dogs out, and it's going to be like 20 minutes minimum. And I think that's what can happen on authenticity is Like if I'm not careful, if I'm not intentional, if I'm not well rested, if I'm distracted, then that people pleasing side of me will come out to accommodate the audience.
Right.
Now, you would think that in the presence of my offspring, right, the risk would be lower. But all my good mother bullshit shows up in that moment. And the right answer is, of course, I will be right there. So that's the pattern a pattern in leadership that I have to watch out for is like the bullshitter in me is probably the technical term will come out. Now, let me just say to your listeners that we've been talking about the bad news. The good news is we also all have what we call an anchor, which is that if I were to like drag you out of bed, Jessi, at 3 a.m, you would be logical or authentic or empathetic. And we call that your trust diagnosis. So I am a empathy anchor and an authenticity wobbler. And Frances, what is your self-diagnosis?
And that's a very common pairing. I have a common pairing as well. I'm a logic anchor and an empathy wobble.
I could even envision that about you, Frances, the logic anchor within the last 20 minutes of our knowing each other.
I would have to break trust with you for you to experience the empathy wobble, but but no one who has known me doubts it for a moment. But I'll explain it in the way that ended. But what happens with me is that if Anne has to worry about people pleasing, I have to worry about the collateral damage I do to other people without even knowing it. So I refer to it as I hit things with my tail.
Oh.
I turn around and sideswipe, and it certainly wasn't intentional, but I wasn't even aware. I'm accountable and responsible,
Right.
but it wasn't purposeful. And it's because I'm not focusing on them.
You're bringing your logic to the game so concretely that you're not making room for how somebody is able to meet it.
So I got to put up reflectors and get some peripheral vision. And that's where my intention has to be on that. So all of us have a superpower. We call it an anchor.
Right.
And all of us have a wobble, the one that tends to get in the way. Now, what you should notice between Anne and I is I'm an empathy wobble. Anne is an empathy anchor. I married up. That's what I recommend you do, listeners, is marry an anchor to your wobble.
Yes. Find an empathy anchor. Keep them close by. You don't
Okay.
have to
It
marry
goes
them,
for
but
every-
bring them
it
into
goes
the
for-
room. Bring
yeah.
them into the room.
For
the
every
tough
wobble
conversations,
and
yeah.
every anchor.
As you're trying to figure out who your best collaborators are, who your best coworkers are, especially your company founders, we like to go into this with a friend. It's really good to have
But you know who we go into it with? When I have everybody in a whole room, I can have 1,000 people in a ballroom, ask them to diagnose their anchor and wobble. And I say, raise hands if you're sitting next to someone who has an identical. 75% of the hands go up. We really like people who are really like us.
Yeah.
But that's not our best collaborator.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Wait, okay. So Anne, so if authenticity is your wobble and empathy is your anchor, then what is your action at 3 a.m. when you are suddenly roused and have an emergency to deal with? How does that matter? Like, what's the...
Oh, I will wake up and wonder, are you okay? What's going on? How can I help?
Right.
I will not wake up angry that you woke me up at 3 a.m.
And I will wake up fixing your problem, even if what you needed was for me to listen to your problem.
Got it. I'm sitting here right now and I'm like, okay, I think I might be, I think I may be exactly where you are. And I think but is it possible to have more than one wobble? Because my wife will tell you, I think I actually am an empathy anchor and an authenticity wobble.
What would your wife say?
That I've got a little work to do on the empathy department.
Yeah, so I would say she's probably right.
Oh, come on.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
I see. That's how it works.
Yeah,
That's how it works.
And maybe that's a good thing for our listeners to think about as they're trying to decode some of this for themselves.
Go show it to someone who knows you and loves you.
Yeah.
And they're going to say one of two things. You're exactly right. Great. Or they're going to say, interesting.
Yeah.
And if they say interesting, they're right. We're revealing who we are all day, every day to everyone else, not always to ourselves.
We're going to take a quick break here. I'll be right back with more from Anne Morris and Frances Frei. And we're back. So before the break, we talked a lot about how individuals build trust. But a lot of Anne and Francis's work is with organizations as a whole, in their moments of crisis. So I wanted to know, when organizations break down, when there's disintegration of trust at the institutional level, what are the most common reasons why? I mean, why don't things work?
A very common one is that organizations have design jobs for employees they wish they had, as opposed to employees they actually have. That's a logic wobble in our language, because the employees don't have the capability to do the job, and it's not their fault. From the receiving end, it's just like, oh my gosh, you're constantly not meeting my needs via this employee who wasn't set up for success.
Does that happen because of a fundamental sort of shortcoming of what it means to be a leader, or a set of assumptions that you're bound to make?
It does, because we design jobs for ourselves.
Right.
And then when we're no longer the employee, we're flummoxed.
Well, I would imagine we're flummoxed both ways, right? We're flummoxed by the things that the employee can't do. And probably at the same time, we miss a lot of what the employee can do, which is perhaps maybe something that's not a core competency for us.
Type 1 and Type 2 flummox, I think we've just decided.
So Francis just described a very common organizational wobble we see. A common authenticity wobble that we will see is saying to the world, we're a meritocracy, but everyone in the system can see that there is a subgroup that is advancing faster through the organization, and it is not based on merit.
Yeah.
So that's another place we will begin. Empathy wobbles are everywhere.
Right.
Right. And the work we were talking about Uber before the show. That was a company that was wobbling on empathy with virtually all of its stakeholders. And so all of that work was around studying the empathy wobble in that particular system.
So the empathy wobble was genuinely, I care more about me than I do about you. So if we think about empathy as, do you get the sense that we're centered on you?
Yeah.
The drivers did not get the sense that Uber was centered on them. The employees, many of them didn't get the sense that Uber was. The people that were giving it money, the investors, did not get the sense. The board of directors did not get the sense. Regulators might have gotten the sense least of all that the company was centered on them.
Right.
So the good news about Uber, and one of the reasons that it took a relatively short period of time to get it back on its feet,
right,
it had the same wobble replicated for all of its stakeholders. I think it would have been harder to get back under control if it was a different wobble for different stakeholders. But it was an empathy wobble through and through. And so once you learn how to overcome an empathy wobble, you can apply it to all of the different stakeholders.
You know, as somebody who covered technology for a couple of decades and covered a lot of small companies that grew into big companies, I had a belief that still remains a suspicion that I think y'all would take issue with, which is that whatever the personality of the company is at birth, whatever its DNA is, that's immutable. It's not changeable. And so, for example, a company like Uber that was led by a real fun founder to interview, but somebody who was just, Travis Kalanick early days was just like, he would just say anything, anytime. He was wild. That was his brand. That was the company. I would have told you that would be what it is forever, that it couldn't change.
It's not that today, though. So how do you make sense of it?
I still kind of feel like it's an outlier. So tell me I'm wrong.
So I think that it would be hard to change under Travis if Travis didn't change. Yeah. So Travis is a self-diagnosed empathy wobbler, like when we do this exercise. And it is not at all surprising that the charismatic founder creates an organization in their image for trust and for other things. I'm going to say when you change the charismatic CEO, you have a chance of changing the company. Now, can you survive? That's a different question.
For sure, the reason we care this much about this question is because the wobbles of individual leaders become the wobbles of teams, become the wobbles of companies, become the wobbles of entire civilizations. And the point of the analysis is that you can't solve an empathy wobble by doubling down on logic, right? Like trust is not actually that useful to us at this esoteric level. You kind of have to pop the hood and get in there. And I'll give you an example from a conversation that we're having with a lot of companies. So Gen Z has shown up in the workplace.
Yes. Yes, they have.
Pissing everybody off, right? And we're rooting for Gen Z. We think they have the courage to ask for things that we didn't have the courage to ask for.
They are our salvation.
So one thing they are asking for is they want to know on day 2 or 3 or maybe 5 when they're going to get promoted, right? That's a very common behavior that we're seeing.
Yes.
Essentially what they're asking for is clarity around the relationship that they have committed to. Like, what are the terms of this employment arrangement? I would like to have all the information.
Right.
That is a logic need that they are revealing. And companies are saying, yes, thank you so much. Such an important question. Here are some extra yoga classes at lunch. Or here's some matcha tea, right? I know you kids like that.
Yeah.
Right? It's essentially an empathy response to a logic need. That's the pattern of disconnects that we see on trust in organizations.
The other thing that I hear in that is like a 2-part conversation. There's what you're saying to Gen Z, and then there's what you're saying to each other about Gen Z, which is also just like a fundamental lack of understanding of that as a logic issue, right? It's interpreted as oh my gosh, they're so entitled. It's an emotional issue. Like, who are they to want that? And my guess is that you would say that is just a fundamental misread of the information you're getting.
I would say there's two parts of what you just articulated. One is an empathy wobble. So a lack of curiosity on this new generation, their relationship to work, their core values. They're different than previous generations. So let's go find out. Like, let's understand like this pattern.
Right.
But the second one is an authenticity wobble, which is a culture of conflict avoidance. So instead of having a conversation
right.
about this pattern
with them,
with the stakeholder,
we just have it about them.
Yeah, right. We're just going to retreat to our own generation, and trash talk the new kids,
right.
Which is, it also reinforces this kind of shaky authenticity inside organizations.
You have a strong conviction that we can shift to an environment and a culture in which there is more trust accessed, and that we can do it within a relatively reasonable, I'm not going to say short, but reasonable period of time. What's the unlock that allows us to move quickly on that?
So I'll begin by saying you must do it in a relatively quick period of time or you're not going to do it. So progress requires momentum.
Yeah.
Now, what you have to do is make sure that you don't recklessly go with abandon.
Yeah.
But when we go slowly, we limit our ceiling.
Yeah.
So we need momentum to do it. So that's the first part of the answer.
Right. And does the momentum often come from an emergency, a break, something so significant that you cannot look away, and then you need to, as a leader, sort of seize that opportunity and move?
It's the easiest way to get it.
It's one of the reasons we like organizations that are, in crisis, because you have everybody's attention and you can move quickly and you can change things very quickly. And if things are going pretty well, then you have to get creative around revealing the problems that need to be solved. And that requires some skill, some storytelling. One of our favorite stories is, Patrick Doyle, who turned around Domino's.
Okay.
And this was a point in the company's history where it was delivering on its brand promise to get you your pizza in 30 minutes or less. But then, as one reporter pointed out at the time, you then had to eat it. Right. So the pizza was terrible. It was just terrible. But things were going pretty well and the stock price was fine and everyone was cozy. So eventually, after trying every kind of traditional leadership tactic in the book, he finally just put up a banner in Times Square and just scrolled customer comments across the banner until he got everybody's attention. They were brutal. It was like, tastes like cardboard, like it was what you would expect. And it was the friction that was required to kind of move this system into change mode. One of the interesting byproducts, by the way, of this is that customers got very invested in this company's pizza turnaround.
I love that.
Right? They became a part of it, like this very visible invitation to come help us get better had all of these cool like branding byproducts.
Right.
And so, it goes like we would say, and we have, our 5-step process that has kind of come out of our work of what companies need to do to fix things quickly and to fix things without breaking them.
Right.
When things are good enough, it's really hard to have a clear and compelling change mandate. And sometimes you got to be as creative as Domino's was.
Yeah. And I feel like good enough characterizes like so much of what is around us, right?
I mean, we wrote this book, Move Fast and Fix Things. It seems like it's a response to this move fast and break things ethos.
Yes.
In fact, what the pattern we see that's causing the most damage is organizations that are going too slowly. That their trust is fine, but they're moving too slowly to actually make progress as an organization or achieve the mission they have set out to achieve.
We call it responsible stewardship, and that doesn't nearly show how judgmental we are about that state.
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how within the organization I work, I generally think that people are pretty reticent to change. They're uncomfortable with change. And that would lead me, without thinking too much about it, to be like, well, then we've got to take it slowly.
Yeah. So this is the great tragedy, is how much we're leaving on the table, how much improvement we're not getting because people are fine.
Mm-hmm.
But we are ambassadors of excellence. So fine is amongst the most depressing things you can say.
Right. Well, nobody wants to be fine. We don't want to be.
We choose it every single day in organizations.
And that's, people aren't afraid of change. They're afraid of things getting worse. Mm. And so when you take people on this change journey, you have to meet them where they are. So what are they afraid of? What are they holding on to? The architecture we use for change storytelling is you got to start by honoring that starting point. So we will say honor the past. So honor the past, then create a compelling mandate for change. So that's what Patrick Doyle did at Domino's. Like, let me give you a reason to behave differently. And then let me describe the future in rigorous and optimistic terms, right? Because we, as human beings, we need a very strong why to evolve our behavior. We get very attached to the way things are around here.
Yeah.
And you have to honor that biology if you're going to take people on this ride and ask them to jump off this cliff with you into the unknown.
It's much easier to change things in motion, and it's much easier to make big changes than little changes. So ambition is your friend and speed is your friend.
It's much easier to make big changes than little changes?
Yes.
Okay, so
if you're everyone who's fine, and you want them to change a small thing, but if you want them to change a big thing, it's much easier because you can galvanize everybody and you can get your noble purpose behind it. So whenever people talk to us about what they want to do, we always suggest add a 0 to your ambition and then let's go do it. And it's much easier to do it. We're always tempted, of course, to go slower and do less, but never has anyone ever reported back, I wish I had done less and I wish I had gone slower. So amp up the ambition. You will get people's hearts and minds for doing it.
And part of the mechanics of that, Jessi, is that I will see the payoff much sooner. Mm-hmm. Right? That flywheel of I'm doing the difficult thing of doing things differently and I'm getting the reward for it. If without ambition, like that feedback loop doesn't work. And once you get it working, then it builds on itself.
Is ambition something that you can train in a person or in yourself?
Yes. It's unleashing their dreams. So the book we wrote before this is called Unleashed. But and that's our shorthand is add a 0, whatever you wanted. Now let's dwell in a world wherever you wanted. We add a 0 to it. What does that feel like? That's our way of getting people in touch with the limits of their ambition, because It's so much easier to do things with ambition than without ambition. So your question is right that people present with varying levels of ambition, but you can get in touch with the upper envelope of it. And I have seen the vast majority of people, you can get them in touch with ambition.
Sometimes Frances loves to ask the question, to make it kind of absurd, if you could sprinkle magic dust, like what would be different tomorrow? And sometimes, particularly like when people are really in the trenches, they haven't dared to even dwell in the possibility of what this future state could really be like. And it's a very powerful catalyst, not just at the individual, but at the systems level as well.
In fact, when we work with organizations, we ask the magic dust question to get them in touch with that. And then we suggest they add a 0. And then we say, now let's get to work. Because we need their ambition in order to be able to do things quickly.
That was Anne Morris and Frances Frei. You can listen to their show, Fixable, wherever you get your podcasts. And you really should. And speaking of, if you have a problem that you would like their help solving, well, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn or email them at fixable@ted.com. Now, there is so much that I'm going to take away from this conversation. First thing, there are 3 core ingredients for building trust: empathy, authenticity, and logic. Second, of these 3 qualities, we all have one that wavers, or as they say, wobbles, and one that holds strong. That one's our anchor. You know, it's important to identify our wobble so we can actively work on tapping into it, and it's just as important to understand our anchor, to ensure we're not using it to overcompensate. And third, amplify your ambition for faster results. Really. It's easier to make big, bold changes than small, little ones because change requires momentum. So leaders should aim for bigger goals. We'll talk about all of this and more at office hours. We'll go live from the LinkedIn news page on Wednesday at 3 p.m., just as we always do. You can find the link to join us in the show notes, in our weekly newsletter, or in our group. Or you can even drop us a line at hellomonday@linkedin.com, and we'll send it to you. Hope to see you there. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. Rachel Karp produced this episode with help from Lolia Briggs. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gadron. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is our anchor. Enrique Montalvo is our executive producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Jessi Hempel. We're back next Monday. I hope you will be too. Thanks for listening.